The company was large, respected, and known across the country for its success. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but deep inside, the man who had built it from nothing felt restless. He was the CEO, the face behind the growth and the vision, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he no longer understood what life was like for the people who worked under him every single day. Reports came to his desk neatly typed, filled with numbers and graphs, but numbers couldn't tell him how his employees truly felt. They couldn't tell him whether people were happy, respected, or struggling. He wanted the truth, and he knew that the truth was often hidden from the eyes of those sitting at the top. He had worked his way up years ago, but success had slowly placed distance between him and the world of ordinary workers. He remembered the times when he used to stay late at night, doing small jobs just to keep things moving. Back then, every coin mattered and every small act of kindness was remembered. Now, surrounded by luxury, he realized he no longer had that connection. He wanted to feel it again, not as a boss who everyone tried to impress, but as someone ordinary, someone who could see the raw truth without the walls people usually put up when the CEO was around. One evening, as he sat in his office long after most of the staff had gone home, an idea came to him. What if he stepped away from his role, not permanently, but for a short time? What if he became someone else, a new face in his own company? That way, no one would try to hide the reality, and he would be able to see how his employees treated people who, in their eyes, had no power at all. It was risky, it was unusual, but something inside him told him it was the only way. The next morning, he began to prepare. He put away his expensive suits and polished shoes. He dressed in simple clothes, the kind any new worker might wear. He trimmed his hair differently, wore glasses, and changed his appearance just enough that he looked familiar yet unrecognizable. With the help of a trusted contact outside the company, he created a new resume that showed him as a fresh graduate with no special connections. He would not walk into his office as the leader. He would walk in as an intern. On his first day, his heart beat faster than it had in years. Walking through the doors of his own company felt different when no one looked twice at him. No one rushed to greet him, no one smiled to impress him. He was just another face, carrying a small bag, waiting for instructions. For the first time in a long time, he felt invisible. The HR assistant barely looked up as she handed him a badge. She pointed him toward a group of new interns and said he would be joining them for training. The CEO, now disguised as a beginner, sat quietly among them, listening to their chatter. Some of them were nervous, some were excited, and a few already complained about how things were run. He kept his eyes open, observing everything, reminding himself to stay in character. As the hours passed, he began to see details he had never noticed before. The office floors were busy, but the energy felt heavy. Some employees seemed stressed, moving quickly with tired eyes, while others whispered to each other about unfair rules. The managers walked by, their tone often sharp, as if authority gave them the right to be cold. He realized that when he came as the CEO, people used to smile, but now as an unknown intern, no one bothered. During a coffee break, one worker gave him a small smile and asked if it was his first day. That tiny act of kindness touched him more than he expected. It reminded him of how powerful a simple gesture could be in a workplace where many seemed afraid to speak. He thanked the worker softly and carried that moment with him. The rest of the day showed him even more. A supervisor gave tasks without explaining properly, then mocked the interns when they struggled. The disguised CEO kept his head down, pretending not to know better, but inside he felt his chest tighten. This was not the culture he had dreamed of when he first started the company. This was not the kind of environment he wanted his people to endure. When he finally returned home that night, he looked at himself in the mirror. The disguise was still on, but for the first time in years, he felt closer to reality. He had only spent one day as an intern, but already he had seen cracks in the system that no report had ever shown him. He wondered what more he would uncover in the days to come. There was fear in his heart, but also determination. He knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would open his eyes to truths he could never have seen from the top floor of his office. The second day as an intern felt different. The CEO, still hidden behind his new identity, woke up earlier than usual, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. He had lived a life of comfort for so long, arriving at the office in luxury cars and being greeted with respect. But now he carried a plain backpack, took public transport, and walked among strangers who had no idea he was their boss. It was humbling, and at the same time unsettling. When he entered the building, no one noticed him. He passed through security without even a smile from the guard. He joined the group of interns, waiting for the day's instructions. Sitting quietly among them, he could hear the chatter about how difficult the work was, and how some managers were nearly impossible to deal with. He stayed silent, listening, absorbing every word. These small conversations gave him more truth than any official report ever had. The tasks assigned to him were simple but repetitive. He was told to carry files, enter data, and follow instructions that often made little sense. He realized quickly that interns were treated as if they were invisible. Some employees barely acknowledged their presence, while others gave orders without a trace of kindness. What shocked him most was how some supervisors spoke with no patience at all. They barked commands, mocked mistakes, and created a culture of fear rather than encouragement. He watched carefully, his heart heavy, because these were the very people responsible for shaping the future workers of his company. At one point, he made a small mistake in the data entry process. Instead of calmly explaining the error, a mid-level supervisor scolded him in front of others, raising his voice as if the intern's value was less than nothing. The disguised CEO kept his head down, pretending to be embarrassed, but inside he was boiling. He wanted to defend himself, to remind the supervisor who he truly was, but he held back. He knew if he revealed his identity now, he would lose the chance to see how things really worked when the boss wasn't around. Not everything was negative, though. During lunch, he saw glimpses of the good. A young employee noticed he had forgotten to bring food and offered to share some of her own. She didn't know who he was, and she didn't expect anything in return. Her simple act of kindness stood out like a light in a room full of shadows. He thanked her and sat quietly, realizing how these small gestures carried more weight than grand words spoken in meetings. Later in the afternoon, he witnessed another scene that troubled him. An older worker, clearly tired and struggling with his tasks, asked a supervisor for help. Instead of offering support, the supervisor dismissed him with a cold remark, telling him to figure it out on his own. The CEO, watching silently, could see the pain in the older man's eyes. This was not the company culture he had once dreamed of building. Something had gone terribly wrong, and he wondered how many of his managers had hidden this truth from him for years. By the end of the day, he felt drained in a way he hadn't felt in decades. The work itself wasn't hard, but the way people were treated made every small task feel heavier. Walking out of the building with the other interns, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had seen enough to know that his company was not the place he imagined it to be. The question now was how deep the problem went, and whether he had the courage to face the answers. When he returned home, he sat in silence for a long time. He thought about the reports he had always trusted, the meetings where managers painted bright pictures of productivity and growth, and the speeches where he praised the company's culture. Now he knew those words were hollow. The truth was hidden in the eyes of workers who felt unappreciated, in the voices of interns who were dismissed, and in the tired steps of employees who had given years of their lives with little recognition. Yet, in all this darkness, there was also hope. He had seen kindness, quiet but genuine. He had seen workers who, despite the pressure, still treated others with respect. He realized these were the people who truly carried the spirit of the company, not the managers who bragged in boardrooms. As he prepared for the next day, he made a promise to himself. He would keep watching, keep listening, and keep learning. He would stay in disguise until he had seen the full truth. Only then would he step forward and change things. His heart was heavy, but it was also filled with determination. What he discovered so far shocked him, but he knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger revelation. The following days as an intern began to open his eyes even more. By now, he had grown used to blending in with the group, moving quietly through the office halls, carrying out whatever small tasks were handed to him. Each day, he learned something new, not from official training or manuals, but from simply observing the way people behaved. The differences in how some treated others stood out to him clearly. There were those who looked down on interns like they were unimportant, and then there were those who treated everyone with the same kindness, no matter their position. One morning, he struggled with a stack of documents that had to be carried to another floor. The load was heavy, and his arms were tired from balancing them. A manager passed by without so much as a glance. But then a young employee, who wasn't even part of his department, noticed his struggle. She walked over with a smile, took half the stack, and said softly, "Here, let me help." That simple act warmed him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that people like her, unnoticed and uncelebrated, were the ones who truly represented the heart of the company. Later that day, while sitting in the break room, he overheard two interns whispering about how unfairly some workers were treated. One mentioned how promotions always seemed to go to those who were favored by certain managers, not to those who worked the hardest. Another talked about how overtime was expected, but rarely appreciated. Listening quietly, the disguised CEO felt a sting of guilt. These were the kinds of stories he should have known long ago, but they had been kept from him by polished reports and smiling faces during presentations. In the afternoon, he was given a chance to work alongside an older employee who had been with the company for more than 20 years. The man's hands were rough, his steps slow, but his dedication was undeniable. While they worked side by side, he began to share pieces of his story. He explained how things had changed over the years, how the company once felt like a family, but slowly turned into a place where people were afraid to speak up. The older worker's voice carried both sadness and loyalty. He still cared deeply, but he felt invisible. The CEO listened closely, his heart heavy, realizing that this man's decades of service had gone mostly unnoticed by those in power. At one point, he asked the older worker what kept him going. The man smiled faintly and said, "Because I believe things can still get better. If we give up, nothing will ever change." That sentence stayed with him for the rest of the day. It was proof that even in hardship, people held on to hope. Before the day ended, another moment struck him deeply. He watched as a supervisor unfairly blamed a mistake on one of the interns, even though it was clear the fault wasn't theirs. The intern stayed silent, eyes down, too afraid to argue. The disguised CEO felt a rush of anger, but he controlled himself. He reminded himself why he was here to see the truth, no matter how painful. That evening, when he left the building, he thought about the contrast he had witnessed. On one side were the managers who used their authority to push others down. On the other side were people who, without recognition, still carried kindness in their hearts and supported those around them. He realized that this quiet kindness was like a hidden treasure within the company. Without it, the entire structure would collapse. At home, he sat alone, reflecting on what he had experienced. He thought about the young employee who helped him carry documents, the older worker who still believed in change, and the interns who shared their frustrations in hushed voices. These were not stories he could find in spreadsheets or annual reports. These were real lives, real emotions, and real struggles. For the first time in years, he felt connected again to the very people who had built his company with him. Brick by brick, effort by effort, he understood something important that night. The strength of a company wasn't measured only in profits or growth charts. It was measured in the way people treated each other when no one was watching. It was measured in the hidden kindness that kept hope alive, even in difficult times. And now, disguised as an intern, he was finally able to see it clearly. As he prepared for the next day, he promised himself he would keep going, no matter how uncomfortable the truth became. Because now, it wasn't just about seeing problems. It was about finding the hidden goodness too. The goodness he wanted to protect and strengthen. When the time for his reveal finally came, the next few days continued to test his patience. By now, the disguise felt natural, and everyone around him believed he was just another inexperienced intern trying to learn the ropes. But each hour he spent in that role revealed more of the hidden truth. He had seen kindness, he had seen neglect, and he had seen the quiet strength of workers who carried the company on their shoulders. Still, nothing prepared him for the breaking point he was about to witness. That had happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The office was buzzing with activity as deadlines approached. People hurried through the halls, their faces tense. He was assigned to assist with organizing files, a task that was simple but required focus. While he worked, he noticed a scene unfolding a few desks away. A hard-working employee, someone who had been patient and supportive toward the interns, accidentally made a small mistake in a report. It was nothing serious, something that could have been fixed within minutes. But instead of calmly addressing it, the manager in charge exploded in anger. The entire room grew quiet as the manager raised his voice, scolding the worker in front of everyone. His tone was sharp, his words cutting, as though the mistake had ruined the entire project. The employee stood frozen, embarrassed and powerless. Others lowered their heads, pretending to focus on their screens, too afraid to step in. The disguised CEO felt his chest tighten. He wanted to shout, to remind the manager that respect costs nothing, but he bit his tongue. He was still undercover, and revealing himself too early would destroy the very reason he was there. As the humiliation continued, he watched the employee's shoulders slump, the spirit drained from someone who had always carried themselves with quiet pride. It was painful to watch. He realized this wasn't just about one incident, it was about a culture that allowed this kind of behavior to thrive. Managers like this believed no one was watching, so they treated people however they wished. It broke his heart to think how many similar moments had happened unnoticed, simply because the real CEO was always kept at a distance. When the meeting ended, the worker quietly returned to their desk, pretending everything was fine, but the hurt in their eyes told a different story. Later, during a short break, the disguised CEO approached them carefully. Without revealing who he was, he offered a few gentle words. "Don't let one person make you forget how valuable you are." The worker gave a small, tired smile. That moment reminded him why he had chosen to do this. People didn't need speeches. Sometimes they just needed someone to remind them of their worth. But the scene stayed with him for the rest of the day. He replayed it in his mind as he completed his tasks. He kept asking himself how many others had suffered like that, belittled, unappreciated, and forced to stay silent just to keep their jobs. He realized that while numbers could show profit, they could never reveal the cost of broken spirits. And he, as the leader, had failed to see it until now. That evening, he stayed longer than most interns, pretending to finish some extra work. In truth, he was watching how the office changed once most of the staff left. He noticed some employees staying late, exhausted, yet determined to finish their tasks. No one praised them, no one thanked them, but they kept going anyway. These were the unsung heroes, the ones who carried the weight while managers took the credit. His respect for them grew deeper with every passing minute. On his way home, he couldn't shake the emotions inside him. Anger burned at the thought of the cruel managers, but sadness pulled at him too. He wondered how he had allowed such a gap to grow between himself and the people who truly made the company work. At the same time, he felt a growing determination. He knew he couldn't stay in disguise forever. At some point, he would have to step forward, confront the truth openly, and make changes that would touch every level of the company. But the time wasn't right yet. He still needed to see more, to gather undeniable proof of the culture that had formed under his watch. Only then would his words carry the weight they needed when he revealed himself. For now, he carried the pain of what he had seen, using it as fuel to keep going. That night, lying in bed, he thought of the worker who had been humiliated earlier. He thought of the interns who had whispered about unfair promotions. He thought of the older employee who still believed change was possible. Their voices blended together in his mind, pushing him toward one clear truth. Leadership wasn't just about building a successful company. It was about protecting the dignity of the people who gave their time, their energy, and their hearts to make it all possible. The breaking point had shown him the ugly reality. Now he knew that when the moment came, he would have no choice but to act. The day finally came when he could no longer keep his disguise. Weeks of watching, listening, and quietly working had opened his eyes to truths he could not ignore. He had seen workers suffer in silence, kindness that went unnoticed, and managers who abused their power. He had also discovered the quiet strength of people who still believed in the company despite everything. His heart was heavy with the weight of what he now knew, but he also carried a spark of hope. It was time to bring the truth into the open. That morning, he walked into the building like every other day, dressed in his simple clothes, carrying his small bag. But his mind was different. He knew that by the end of the day, nothing would be the same. He completed his assigned tasks without drawing attention, but inside he was preparing. He had asked for a gathering to be arranged, under the pretense of an intern presentation. No one suspected anything unusual. People assumed it would be a short meeting to review the intern's progress. When the time came, the staff filled the room. Managers stood confidently at the front, ready to critique, while employees and interns sat quietly, waiting. He stood with the other interns, his heart pounding. Then, slowly he stepped forward. Everyone's eyes turned to him, but most didn't recognize him yet. His disguise had worked too well. He took a deep breath, looked at the room filled with people who had unknowingly revealed their true selves to him, and spoke. "My time here as an intern has been eye-opening," he began. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "I've seen how this company really works, not from reports or meetings, but from the ground, side by side with all of you." Some people looked confused, unsure why this intern was speaking as though he had authority. A few managers frowned, impatient to move things along. Then, he reached up, removed his glasses, straightened his posture, and let his natural confidence return. A wave of shock spread across the room. Gasps filled the air. Faces turned pale, eyes widened. Whispers ran through the crowd as realization hit them. The intern was not an intern at all. He was the CEO, the man they had only ever seen in formal suits, standing on stage at company events, was now standing before them as the same person they had ignored, helped, mocked, or mistreated. "I am your CEO," he said, his voice stronger now. "And for the past weeks, I have lived among you, not as your leader, but as one of you. I wanted to see the truth for myself. I wanted to know how my people are treated when no one is watching." Silence filled the room. Some employees lowered their heads in shame. Others, the ones who had shown kindness, stared in disbelief, unable to process what was happening. He continued, his tone heavy with emotion. "What I discovered has shocked me. I have seen acts of cruelty, disrespect, and unfairness. I have watched good people treated poorly, while those with authority abused their positions. This is not the company I built, and this is not the culture I ever wanted." The managers who had been harsh with him shifted uncomfortably, their confidence gone. Employees who had shown kindness sat stunned, realizing that their small gestures had been witnessed by the most powerful, person in the room, but I have also seen hope," he said, softening his tone. "I have seen kindness from those who had nothing to gain. I have seen loyalty from those who were given little in return. These are the people who represent the true spirit of this company. And it is because of them that I am standing here today, determined to make things right." A murmur spread through the room. Some workers lifted their heads, their eyes shining with cautious hope. For years they had felt unseen, but now the most important person in the company was not only seeing them, he was acknowledging their struggles out loud. He looked directly at the employees who had helped him when he was disguised. "To those who showed compassion, thank you. You reminded me what leadership truly means. To those who acted with cruelty, know this: things will change. The days of hiding behind authority while hurting others are over." The room remained silent, but the energy had shifted. The staff knew this was not an empty speech. This was a promise. The CEO had walked in their shoes, and he would never forget what he had learned. He ended with words that carried both strength and humility. "From today forward, we will rebuild this company, not just as a place of work, but as a place where dignity and respect are the foundation. I will not lead from the top floor anymore. I will lead from where you are, side by side." The employees erupted in applause, some with tears in their eyes. The managers who had abused their power stayed quiet, realizing their time was up. The workers who had carried the company silently for so long finally felt seen. As he walked out of the room, no longer disguised, he knew his life as a CEO would never be the same again. He had gone undercover to find the truth, and what he discovered had changed not only his company, but also himself.